My name's Mark. I'm a structural engineer, usually working on old bridges or train tunnels. But last fall, I got a job from a historical preservation society to inspect an abandoned lighthouse off the coast of Rhode Island. They wanted to determine if it was salvageable enough to restore as a heritage site, remote place, no dock, no road access, just a lighthouse on a chunk of rock you had to reach by a small ferry. They gave me 4 days. I'd be staying there alone, with a generator for power, a satellite phone in case of emergencies, and enough food and water for the week. It wasn't my first solo site job, so I wasn't too worried. I arrived on a Tuesday morning, ferried out by a local contractor. He didn't say much beyond, call if anything breaks. Weather can change quick this time of year. The place looked its age. The white paint was blistered off the lighthouse walls. The auxiliary shed was rusted through, and seagull droppings covered just about everything. Still, it was quiet and beautiful in its own way. The first 2 days went by as expected. I logged damage to the support beams, took photos of corroded stairwells, made notes on areas that would need major reinforcement. My plan was to work through the daylight and relax at night with a book and a battery-powered radio. But on the 3rd day, while checking the generator room on the lower level, I noticed something odd. One of the wall panels behind the fuel tank was slightly loose. At first, I assumed moisture had warped it, but when I pulled it back, I found a space between the inner and outer wall. Jammed in there, wrapped in old wax cloth, was a leather-bound journal. It was swollen with water damage. The edges frayed and stained, but the pages were surprisingly legible. The entries were dated from 1974. The first dozen pages were mostly mundane notes on fuel levels, weather patterns, meal schedules. The author never signed a name, but based on the handwriting and tone, I guessed it was a lighthouse keeper. About a week into the entries, though, things took a turn. He started describing hearing noises, footsteps in the stairwell at night, faint, knocking from the beacon room above. At first, he thought it was just the wind or a trick of isolation. But then he mentioned waking up to find the main door ajar, even though he always bolted it shut. Tools moved. A mug of coffee left half drunk, even though he didn't remember making any. I won't lie, it gave me chills reading it, especially since the layout he described was identical to what I was seeing, down to the location of a squeaky stair step. I spent that evening sitting on the steps outside, watching the waves crash in silence. I told myself it was just an old journal, cabin fever, but the entries kept getting worse. He started writing at odd hours, describing nightmares of someone standing at the foot of his bed. He said the person never moved, never spoke, just stood there dripping wet, watching him. One entry just read, "It doesn't want the light to turn." That line kept playing in my head. That night, I woke up at 3:12 a.m. to a low thud above me, like something heavy being set down. I laid still for a minute, trying to rationalize it. Maybe the wind had shifted some loose equipment. Maybe a bird. I got up and walked slowly up the spiral stairs, flashlight in hand. The beacon room door was shut, but the latch wasn't locked. I opened it carefully, nothing. Just the old beacon mechanism, still intact, though not dust everywhere. But then I noticed something else. The chair by the far window, a metal stool that had been against the wall earlier, was now facing the glass, like someone had been sitting there. I hadn't touched it, and no wind could have moved it that precisely. I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, I double-checked the logs I had been given by the Preservation Society. Something was off, according to their documents. No official lighthouse keeper had been stationed at this lighthouse after 1969. Automation had been installed, and the building was left unstaffed after that. But the journal I found was dated 1974. I brought it outside into the sunlight to double check. The dates were clear. The entries went on for weeks. How could that be? Was it fake? A prank? But who would go through that effort in a place nobody visited? On my final night, I decided to do one last walkthrough. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted closure. Maybe I wanted to prove to myself that it was just an old book and some creaky wood. I started from the base and climbed all the way to the beacon room. I stood there, looking out at the sea, trying to ignore the growing unease in my chest. Then I turned around. On the floor, right in the center of the room, was the journal. I had left it in my gear bag downstairs. It was open to the last. Page 1 I hadn't seen before. In the same handwriting as all the others, it read, "He never left." I thought if I kept the light on, he wouldn't come. But it burned out. I didn't mean for it to burn out. Below it, in shaky smeared pen, was a second line. "Don't let the light go dark." I left the next morning. Didn't wait for the preservation team to call me. I radioed the contractor and asked to be picked up early. When he asked why, I just told him the structure was too far gone, unsafe, not worth the cost. I never turned in the journal. I still have it. Some nights I think about burning it. Other nights I find myself reading it again, running my fingers over the pages like they might offer a different ending. The preservation project got scrapped. They cited budget issues, logistical challenges, but I think maybe someone else read the entries, maybe they knew too. I haven't taken a solo assignment since, especially not near the water, because sometimes, when I wake up around 3 a.m., I think I hear footsteps. Not in my house, not in my hallway, but above me, in a room that isn't there. My name's Marcus. I'm a structural diver, which is just a fancy way of saying I get paid to inspect underwater foundations, seawalls, bridge pylons, and anything else that sits between concrete and saltwater. It's not glamorous, but it pays. Well, and I like being alone. I've worked up and down the East Coast, but the job I'll never forget was in early spring of 2021. I got contracted by a state-funded restoration group up in Massachusetts. Their concern was a deteriorating breakwater system about a mile offshore from a retired lighthouse. The lighthouse itself hadn't been in use since the 80s. It sat on this long finger of rock that jutted into the bay like a spine, unreachable by land. They wanted to determine whether the breakwater could be repaired or if it needed full replacement. My job was simple. Stay on a small anchored barge for 5 days, dive during daylight, document structural damage, then radio in my logs each night. The weather was supposed to be stable, so I agreed. They ferried me out early on a Monday and left me with a compact barge outfitted with a generator, sonar gear, fuel drums, a fold-out cot, and a dry cabin for sleep and storage. It was basic, but I've done worse. There was no cell service out there, just a VHF radio for scheduled contact. I was alone, and that was fine by me. The first 2 days went smoothly. Cold water, low visibility, and seaweed tugging at my mask. But that's just part of the job. I documented several eroded seams and some shifted support stones. Normal wear and tear for an old seawall. But on day 3, I saw something strange. While tracing a deep crack along the lower west side, about 20 feet down, I noticed a square shape embedded in the wall. It didn't look natural. I cleared away some silt and found what looked like a metal hatch bolted directly into the stone. Old iron, corroded but intact. About 4 feet tall, maybe 3 wide. No handle, no hinges. Just a flat rectangular door, set into the wall. At first I figured it was some kind of old equipment vault. Lighthouses often had fuel lines or cable runs buried into the shore. But then I saw the plaque dot. It was attached just above the door, half eaten by rust, but still legible. Do not open while lit. I surfaced and logged it, marked the coordinates. I didn't mention the inscription over the radio, figured it was some forgotten Cold War precaution. Still, I took a photo. That night, something strange happened. I was eating a heat-packed meal inside the cabin when I noticed light out of the corner of my eye. I stepped out onto the barge and looked toward the old lighthouse. A single flash from the top of the tower, then nothing. It made no sense. The lighthouse was decommissioned. No power grid, no solar, nothing. It was supposed to be dead. I stayed up a while, watching, but it didn't happen again. The next day, I returned to the same section of the wall. The door was slightly open, just an inch, maybe 2, but it hadn't been like that the day before. I'm not the kind of guy who jumps to conclusions. I double-checked the area, made sure I was at the right spot. same depth, same markings. There was no current strong enough to move it. No underwater pressure that would force a sealed metal plate loose. I tried peeking in, but visibility was garbage, just murky black. I didn't touch it. I surfaced and spent the rest of the day inspecting a different section. That night, I watched the lighthouse again, two flashes, like a signal, then nothing. That time, I stayed up most of the night. I kept hearing faint vibrations, almost like a low hum carried on the water. At first, I thought it was feedback from the generator, but even after I shut it down, the noise continued. I didn't sleep well. Day 5, I returned to the hatch. It was wide open, not swinging open, not blown off, just gaping into blackness. The plaque above it had come loose, hanging by one bolt. I got close enough to feel the water temperature change. It was colder near the opening, still. Heavy dot and then something else. There was a kind of pulse coming from inside. Not movement, but a pressure wave, like the way you feel a ferry rumble through your chest before you hear it. Just a slow, rhythmic thump every 10 seconds or so. I didn't go in. I didn't want to get any closer. I marked it, surfaced, and called for an early pickup. Said there were unregistered structural anomalies that needed higher clearance. They said the boat would arrive by morning. That night, I shut everything down and locked myself in the dry cabin. I didn't want to look at the lighthouse, but I couldn't help it. The beacon was glowing. Not flashing this time, just a steady, silent beam cutting through the dark. There was no generator up there, no active system, but the light was on. Then came the knocking. 3 knocks. From beneath the barge. Slow, solid, with dash on dash metal. I sat completely still. No animals could do that. No debris, either, not with that spacing, that rhythm. I stayed locked in, radio in hand, knife nearby. A few hours passed. Then came the second round of knocks. This time, from the cabin door. I held my breath, waited, finally stood, and opened it slowly. Nothing, just night air, in the still sea. The lighthouse was dark again. When the boat came the next morning, I didn't say much. I handed over my footage, my notes, and that photo of the plaque. I told them someone needed to dive deeper into the site, maybe bring sonar and a full team. They promised to file a request. A month later, I followed up. No one had gone out. The project had been delayed indefinitely. I still check the satellite view sometimes. The breakwater is crumbling, and the lighthouse sits untouched. But once, just last year, I looked at the NOAA site for marine beacons. That lighthouse has no listing, no record, like it was never there. I'm not diving near it again. I don't need to know what's behind that door, and I don't think anyone else should open it while it's lit.